Good evening. How are you? Well, it's 80 something. It was 90 something earlier today, and but it's pretty calm now. The sun's setting. There's very slight, cool breezes. So I hope you had a good Sunday. Okay, that's my audience. I think that was approval. This would have been a good day to lounge in water. And I did go past the local pool, but it looked like the people were bumper to bumper. And I like to do laps. I can't just stand in water. So I got my swim in yesterday indoors in a pool. So that was that. And today we're striving down the trail, the Cathedral of Trees, the place where wisdom becomes evident upon contemplation. Well, in the category of trying to find wisdom, the story basically today is this the beginning of the end for Vladimir Putin? And I think the answer is, did you miss what was going on? The way I see it is that Prigozhin, the general of the mercenaries in the Wagner Group, has got 25,000 soldiers, mostly handpicked. And Prigozhin is an expert warrior. And I'm not taking the part of Russia here, but I want to give some reality to what's going on. Because the story is, did Putin blink to Prigozhin? Well, Prigozhin was the one who said, I'm going to march up to Moscow. He's going to walk up a protest walk up to Moscow and do what he had to do. So what happened on the way to that march? He stood down, and he's in Belarus. It feels more like Putin understands Management 101 better than some other leaders do. And don't forget that this guy's an old ally and friend, and seemingly he's quite pissed off at Putin. Now, it remains to be seen if Putin will decide that where we are now meets his desires, which is to say, no recrimination against Prigozhin or his men or anybody associated with it. What Putin is more interested in, making the choices of what's best under the circumstances for him, is to be able to wage war with Ukraine, not to have a revolution with an old ally inside Russia. And so the staging point for Ukraine is the area where Prigozhin was. And Prigozhin came up and had a heart-to-heart, perhaps with an intermediary, and the deal was struck. You stop your protest, we won't arrest you, you go to Belarus. And the question remains, of course, if a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, a year, whether he'll still be drinking that unbelievable vodka they have in Russia, or tainted tea. But for the time being, and I would expect the near future, Putin is not looking to have squabbles among his team and doesn't want to give encouragement to anyone. And if you were reading this as a person thinking of having a protest, you'd say, Prigozhin, who is a real fighter after the battles he's been in, if he's decided to take a step back, then what do I have to go on if I object to what Putin is doing? Okay, now that may be simplistic, but I don't think so. When we actually find out the facts in the next several days, with the intelligence that will slip out of our people, and maybe not be reliable for that reason, we'll find out what's going on. But before Zelensky or we or any of the allies start celebrating, let's take a step back. Also, if I understood correctly, Slovakia has stood down on its position in support of the Ukraine. So other things are happening, and we're going to have to wait and see what they are and then synthesize them to tell us what is going on there. So enough of that. In America, we continue to have violence. 3 people dead, 20 or some large number wounded in Kansas, and they were not sure what the count was of those who were in the hospitals when I spoke to them. Situation normal, all fill in the blank. That's where we are. Now, the U.S. Coast Guard is going to look at the ship that blew in. That is the submersible, the Titan, not so Titanic, if you will, given that its material was probably worn and couldn't withstand another dive. And the stories talk about a year or so ago, another confident deep sea diver was with the head of the corporation that runs these submersibles, or did. And as they were going down, it shook almost uncontrollably. And he was advised, now you gotta take a step back. You can't go out and put people in these machines at this way. Now, he obviously did something, and there had been a bunch of dives, but here's the rub. The rub is that you did the dives, and each time the carbonate was weakening, and once that finally gave, then you had the implosion that was such a disaster. So it will be interesting to hear the details of how these ships work, and in the best case, it will signal reforms for any kind of equipment that the public has to use, as opposed to, test pilots, if you will. The actor, I don't know if you followed him, Julian Sands, he went for a hike in the mountains. I think it's Baldy Mountain, and he hasn't been heard of. Now, the mountains where he did this, at certain heights, in recent days, they've been cold, there have been strong winds, and so they have been treacherous. And he apparently was out in that. And it doesn't mean he didn't find a way to survive. But there's a lesson here, and it is that a seeming pleasurable road like the one that I'm on, and there are trails like that, but when you stray from those trails and you ignore the weather, you put yourself and whomever is with you at risk. There's a place nearby, I think it's called Maryland Heights, and if you go from the bottom near Harper's Ferry on the Maryland side to the top, you ascend about 1,100 feet over 4 miles. And in some places it's pretty steep. And at different times the Confederates and the Union troops bivouac there, not at the same time. And there's one place where you're going up is pretty steep. And it's said that Lincoln came to visit the troops there, and he was on horseback, and he went back down there. It was too steep. I don't know how it would have been if he got off and tried to lead the horse, but it was pretty steep all the way up from that point on. And once I did that walk, and it was getting dark, and I went off the trail, and I decided it was time to go down. And I had been focusing on the beauty I was observing. So this is another treachery about being out in the wild, or if not the wild, the beautiful countryside. And basically, the math that I used was, where's the sun? And the pinnacle went down to on the Maryland side, to the Shenandoah River, which joined the Potomac River. And so I literally walked across to where I suspected the Shenandoah was, and it was there, and I went down. Simple problem, simple solution, but Mr. Sands, big problem, requires a big solution, or you may not have a solution at all. So I hope that we learned something from that, meaning that he was rambunctious enough to find a way to get up and down the mountain. I think just thinking about going up these steep mountains is taking some of my own breath away. Now, in the category of, some people said, what could I meditate about? Well, the number's infinite. And what I say to some, even though I'm not religious, that the proof of a divinity is that for an alert mind, that you're never bored. Doesn't mean you're joyful, but it means you're never bored. But in the category of the pleasant, to look at and to think about, there's a big showing of a Japanese artist, and I think his material, you people correct me, in about 1849, when the American ships and others came to Japan. And he had never been to Europe. But because they did, they discovered his gorgeous, simple prints of commonplace things, but dramatic and beautiful to observe. And when I was younger, I was fascinated by all things Japanese. And one of the reasons was that my dad thought I should learn judo, so I had some rules to go by if I was involved in, fist fights on the street and stuff like that. But I got to meet a lot of wonderful people, and one was a guy, Yotsun Matsumura, who spoke little English, but he had competed in the Olympics in judo. And I was studying judo at the Buddhist Academy to compete in AAU, which, by the way, was a good way to get beaten up. Although I had a decent record. I had very good teachers. And for Yochin, he got involved with a lady out in California. And I was writing his letters for him. It was a great relationship. And so if you want to test how attracted you are to the skills of Hokusai, Hokusai, go online, or a lot of museums have his pieces, and take a look at it, or go online and get one picture that catches your fancy and put that aside, and that can be your meditation. See, I'm pretty good at homework assignments. I was asked if, what would be a couple of examples, and I gave the obvious ones in an earlier walk and talk. But something like that, or any art. It doesn't have to be Hokusai. You might like the purely abstract. You might like sculptures, all sorts of things. It's enriching to the soul, religious or not. It enthuses you for life. And I still have some of Hokusai's wood prints from years ago. And because I'm saying this now, maybe I'll look for something I haven't had before. It has marvelous ones of the country there. So that's about what I got on my mind. And here we are on the the Cathedral of Trees. And I hope to see you tomorrow. All the best. Bye-bye.